Disclaimer: this story is a complete fiction and has absolutely no relation to any real persons, organizations, or events. It is an entertainment work created as a geopolitical what-if simulation. It does not support any specific political views. The Deep Strategy of Kong Ming's Descendant, final complete edition of the Strait Unification under Heaven. Prologue: a private room in Zhongnanhai, Beijing, late at night, a room where only the supreme leader and one man remained. Amidst the drifting scent of sandalwood, the man quietly began to speak. "My name is Zhuge Ziwa. I am the 37th direct descendant of Zhuge Ming." Holding an antique feather fan, which was actually the latest tablet, he pointed to a satellite image of the Strait of Hormuz. "Your Majesty, right now the world stands at a historic turning point. U.S. President Trump has escalated military conflict with Iran, effectively putting the oil route in the Strait of Hormuz into a state of blockade. And he is calling out to other countries, send your ships and protect it together. However, the U.S. military itself has begun to retreat, and its allies are appalled. The world has already begun to realize the U.S. has self-destructed and can no longer even protect its allies." The Supreme Leader nodded. "That is where we make our move. The first stratagem, deployment of escort ships and the 'We will protect you' declaration. We will dispatch an escort fleet to the Strait of Hormuz. Centered around our state-of-the-art large destroyers, we will also be accompanied by the aircraft carrier Fujin. And we will declare to the world, the Chinese Navy will protect not only our own tankers, but also the ships of other countries. We will broadcast to cameras all over the world the sight of us gently escorting all tankers from Japan, South Korea, Europe, India, Saudi Arabia. With this, the oil route in the Middle East will suddenly be placed under Beijing's influence. The second stratagem, a fixed race with Iran." The Supreme Leader furrowed his brows. "What about Iran? They are our biggest oil supplier. If we say, 'we will protect,' wouldn't that cause Iran to lose face?" Zhuge Ziwa smiled. "We have made a secret agreement with Iran. We call this a fixed race. The contents of the agreement are as follows. Once the Chinese Navy deploys, the Iranian Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps will completely refrain from attacking. Any ship that China declares it will protect will be allowed to pass safely. However, ships related to the registry, ownership, or operation of the U.S. and Israel will be exceptions. This means that even if Iran continues to attack them, China will turn a blind eye. On the surface, it is neutral peacekeeping. Behind the scenes, we implicitly approve of Iran's right of self-defense. This allows Iran to save face while acting as China's ally." The third stratagem, a decisive blow using currency, limited edition. "However, Your Majesty, this alone is not enough. The final thrust will be currency." "What do you mean?" "We will frame our official statement like this. The Chinese Navy will only escort ships carrying oil settled in non-US dollar currencies. Specifically, this is limited to settlements in major non-US dollar currencies, such as the Chinese yuan, euro, Japanese yen, Indian rupee, Russian ruble, UAE dirham, and Saudi riyal. This effectively excludes minor currencies like the Taiwan dollar and Israeli shekel, and as long as U.S. and Israel-related ships settle in dollars, or equivalent, they will be excluded from our escort. The spectacle the world will see is this: a Chinese destroyer gently escorting a Japanese tanker that bought oil priced in Japanese yen. Footage broadcast worldwide of Indian ships whose oil is priced in Indian rupees expressing their gratitude. Saudi ships dealing in Saudi riyals bowing their heads to Beijing. Meanwhile, U.S. and Israel-related ships using dollar settlements are left exposed to Iranian attacks. China simply answers, unfortunately, they do not meet the escort criteria. What will happen as a result? Dollar-settled oil becomes dangerous, and the world simultaneously shifts to major non-U.S. dollar currency settlements. Oil-producing countries, led by Saudi Arabia, accelerate yuan settlements. American dollar hegemony, the power of SWIFT, begins to collapse in the face of the reality in the Strait. Oil prices stabilize, and the global economy is saved, but all the credit goes to China. Climax, the world's reaction. New York, Wall Street. The dollar index plummets. The cries of traders. China says they will only protect major non-U.S. dollar currencies, yuan, yen, rupee, euro. This is the end of oil settlements in dollars. The American century is over. Tokyo, the national diet. A fictional opposition MP, Kenichi Sato, former university professor, specialist in geopolitics and national security, raises his voice. Prime Minister, this is a fixed race. China and Iran have joined hands, targeting only dollar-denominated ships. Moreover, it is limited to major non-U.S. dollar currencies, so while the Japanese yen is protected, ships that remain dependent on the dollar will be abandoned. Much of Japan's crude oil imports are still dollar-denominated. At this rate, our lifeline will be grasped in China's hands. How long will you keep saying, "We will closely monitor the situation while maintaining the U.S.-Japan alliance"? Epilogue. Night in Beijing. Zhuge Ziwa placed his feather fan against his chest and bowed. Lord Kongming preserved the state of Shu with his Longzhong plan. I am merely presenting a plan for the unification of the strait under heaven and the end of hegemony currency. All starts from this fixed race and the starvation tactics via major non-U.S. dollar currencies. Outside the window, the wakes of the fleet heading to Hormuz shone quietly on the satellite image. It indicated the beginning of a new world order like a silver needle.
Picture this. It is midnight in Beijing.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
You are inside this secure, totally private room in Zhongnanhai, the central headquarters of the government, and the air is thick with the scent of sandalwood.
So it's a very specific, kind of intense mood.
It really does, and sitting across from the supreme leader is just a single man, and in his hand, he's holding a traditional feather fan, like the exact kind that ancient scholars used to carry into battle centuries ago.
Which is such a brilliant visual. I mean, you have this ancient tool of the mastermind strategist just completely out of place in a modern geopolitical war room.
Right, but then he taps the fan and it lights up because it's actually a disguised state-of-the-art tablet.
Ah, love that detail.
Yeah, it's displaying live, high-resolution satellite imagery of the Middle East. And that image, an ancient strategist wielding modern tech to basically redraw the map, that is exactly what we're unpacking today. Welcome to today's deep dive.
Glad to be here for this one. It's quite a ride.
It really is. We are looking at this fascinating thought experiment, a piece of geopolitical fiction called The Deep Strategy of Kongming's Descendant.
Right, and it's a simulation, really.
Exactly. And just to be completely clear up front, we aren't endorsing any politics here or anything. Our mission today is just to impartially unpack this scenario. Because while it is fiction, the systemic vulnerabilities it exposes in our real-world supply chains and our global financial systems, well, it should probably keep everyone awake at night.
Oh, absolutely. It truly functions as a masterclass in asymmetrical thinking. I mean, it forces you to visualize how global power actually functions in practice, not just how it looks on, a diplomatic treaty.
Right, because we usually think of power in terms of missiles or tanks or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. But this scenario explores the quiet, devastating power of logistics and, oddly enough, maritime insurance.
Maritime insurance, which sounds boring until it literally collapses an empire. So let's meet our mastermind with the glowing fan. In this scenario, his name is Zhuge Ziwa, and he introduces himself to the supreme leader as the 37th direct descendant of Zhu Liang.
which is a huge deal.
Right. For anyone who doesn't, spend their weekends reading ancient Chinese military history, Zhu Ziwa, who's also known as Kong Ming, was basically the ultimate legendary strategist of the Three Kingdoms period.
Yeah, the absolute mastermind.
Exactly. He is famous in history and literature for winning these massive, totally impossible battles without actually fighting. Like, he used pure intellect, psychological warfare, and just a deep understanding of his enemy's systems to trap them.
And understanding that lineage, that history, is absolutely critical to understanding everything that follows in this thought experiment.
How so?
Well, this modern descendant, Zhuge Ziwa, he isn't proposing a direct military clash with the West. A direct clash is loud, it's costly, and it's unpredictable.
Right.
Instead, he's proposing a systemic trap. But to see how the trap works, we really have to look at the inciting incident of the simulation.
It's a spark that sets it all off.
Exactly. The simulation sets up this highly volatile, yet entirely plausible global crisis.
Yeah.
Basically, the United States has drastically escalated a military conflict with Iran.
And that escalation essentially turns the Strait of Hormuz into a blockaded, highly dangerous war zone.
Right.
And if you're listening to this and wondering why a fictional naval standoff halfway across the world matters to you, well, consider how you're going to pay for gas next week, or how all the goods you order online are manufactured.
Yeah, the real-world implications are huge.
Because the Strait of Hormuz is only about 21 miles wide at its narrowest point, but roughly a fifth of the world's total oil consumption passes through that tiny bottleneck every single day.
A fifth. That's massive.
Yeah, shutting it down is like putting a tourniquet on the global economy.
Precisely. And in the midst of this blockade, the simulation introduces a really fascinating paradox. The U.S. loudly demands that all its global allies send their own naval ships to the Middle East, to help defend the strait and keep the oil flowing. But simultaneously, the U.S. military itself begins to pull its assets back from the region.
Which is just the ultimate mixed signal. It's like, well, imagine a neighborhood watch leader stirring up a massive hornet's nest in the cul-de-sac.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
Right. They're screaming at all the neighbors to come outside and fight the swarm, but then they immediately run inside and lock their own front door.
Leaving you outside with the hornets.
Exactly. You are just left standing on the lawn getting stung.
And the psychological shift that occurs in the simulation at this exact moment is profound. Because the world, and specifically America's closest allies, suddenly realizes they are effectively being abandoned.
Wow.
Yeah, they're staring down an existential energy crisis, their supply chains are frozen, and the protective umbrella they relied on for decades just folded up and left.
Leaving a huge void.
Exactly. It creates a massive, terrifying power vacuum in one of the most economically vital regions on Earth.
So the table is completely set. The U.S. has stepped back, the hornets are swarming, and the whole world is panicking about how they are going to get their energy.
Right.
So how does our modern-day Kong Ming exploit this vacuum?
Well, Zhuge Ziwa executes his first major move, and that is the deployment of a massive Chinese naval escort fleet directly into the Hormuz Strait.
Okay, so they're stepping in.
Big time. We are talking about an overwhelming display of hardware. Advanced Type 055 large destroyers, accompanied by the aircraft carrier Fujian.
That's a lot of firepower.
It is, but the hardware is actually secondary to the messaging. Beijing broadcasts this deeply benevolent, entirely non-threatening message to the globe.
What do they say?
They announce that the Chinese Navy is stepping in to protect everyone's tankers. Japanese, Korean, European, Indian, Saudi, it simply doesn't matter. China will safely escort the world's energy supply through the danger zone.
Oh, wow. The PR optics of that are just staggering.
Unbelievable, right?
Yeah. Imagine watching this play out on the news. Every network in the world showing the Chinese Navy kindly, peacefully escorting the absolute lifeblood of the global economy through a war zone.
Looking like total heroes.
Exactly. Instantly, without firing a single shot, the Middle East oil route is placed firmly under Beijing's sphere of influence. They look like the ultimate, responsible global peacekeepers stepping up when the West stepped down.
It establishes profound diplomatic goodwill. Just immense leverage.
But hold on, though. There's a massive blind spot here, isn't there?
What's that?
Well, China buys a huge percentage of its own oil from Iran. Right, so if Beijing rolls into the strait playing global bodyguard against Iranian attacks, Tehran is going to be absolutely furious. You're stepping on the toes of your most important regional partner.
That is a very sharp observation.
So how does the simulation solve that friction? I mean, how does China do this without losing face with Iran?
That is the exact vulnerability the Supreme Leader brings up in that room in Zhongnanhai. And it's where Zhuge's ancient strategic roots really show.
Okay, what's his play?
He explains that this entire peacekeeping operation is actually a fixed game. It's a rigged race with Iran.
A rigged race.
Yeah. Long before the Chinese fleet even launched from port, Beijing and Tehran forged a highly classified pact. The deal is incredibly simple. Once the Chinese Navy deploys, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard agrees to hold their fire.
Wait, really? Just like that?
Just like that. Any commercial ship that China publicly declares it is protecting gets an automatic guaranteed free pass through the strait.
Oh, man. So there is no actual combat required because the outcome is totally predetermined.
Exactly. It's all theater.
But there has to be a catch. I mean, Iran wouldn't just give up its leverage in the region for nothing.
You're absolutely right. There is a very deliberate exception to this rule of protection.
I knew it. What is it?
American and Israeli ships, or literally any vessels registered, owned, or operated by their corporate entities, are strictly excluded from China's protection umbrella. Yeah. For those specific ships, the secret agreement allows Iran to continue its attacks, and the Chinese Navy will simply look the other way, citing that it is not their jurisdiction.
That is brilliantly cynical.
It really is. Think about how this functions on a geopolitical level. Outwardly, to the global public, China looks like a completely neutral, heroic peacekeeper just trying to stabilize a chaotic region for the good of humanity.
Right, the saviors of the global economy.
But inwardly, they are deliberately allowing Iran to exercise what Tehran would frame as self-defense against its adversaries. So Iran gets to save face, they get to continue their geopolitical struggle without interference, and they are essentially weaponized as a covert enforcer for Beijing's grand strategy.
And meanwhile, the rest of the world safely gets its oil and owes China a massive debt of gratitude.
Exactly.
They basically engineer a situation where they gain all the leverage, look like the heroes, and take zero blame for the violence that does occur.
It's masterful.
It's like the empty city strategy updated for the 21st century. And here's where the simulation pivots from just a clever military maneuver into something truly groundbreaking.
Right, the economic side.
Yeah, because controlling the physical ships in the water is impressive. But Zhuge tells the Supreme Leader that military presence alone isn't enough to permanently shift the global order. The actual checkmate of this entire scenario, the real killing blow, has to be delivered via currency.
And this brings us to the absolute core of the thought experiment. That transition from physical power to economic power.
So how do they do it?
Zhuge proposes an official, highly specific decree that China will issue to the world regarding their new escort services. The decree states that the Chinese Navy will only provide physical protection to ships carrying oil that was purchased in major non-US dollar currencies.
Okay, let's look at the specific currencies Beijing approves in this scenario, because it's a very calculated list.
It is.
If you are a nation buying your oil in Chinese yuan, euros, Japanese yen, Indian rupees, Russian rubles, UAE dirham, or the Saudi rial, congratulations, you get a heavily armed naval escort.
Safe passage guaranteed.
But the decree deliberately ignores minor currencies, and most importantly, it completely omits the US dollar. There is zero protection for dollar-based trade.
And that's exactly how the trap springs. If a ship, regardless of its nationality, insists on trading their oil contracts in US dollars, the Chinese Navy essentially shrugs.
They just say, sorry, can't help you.
Exactly. They broadcast to the world, we are so sorry, but your cargo does not meet our specific escort criteria, and they leave that ship totally exposed to the Iranian Revolutionary Guard.
Let's pause here and really break this down for anyone listening who doesn't, stare at financial charts all day.
Sure.
Why is this specific move so devastating? Why does the currency the oil is bought in matter more than the oil itself?
To understand the sheer lethality of this move, we really have to talk about the petrodollar. Back in the 1970s, an agreement was reached where global oil would be priced and traded almost exclusively in US dollars. And this is arguably the foundational pillar of modern American economic dominance.
Because everyone needs oil.
Exactly, because every country on Earth needs oil. Every country on Earth is forced to hold massive reserves of US dollars just to buy it.
And what do they do with those billions of dollars sitting in their reserves? They invest them in US Treasury bonds.
Yes, they essentially lend money to the American government. which allows the U.S. to fund its massive deficits, build its military, and maintain a high standard of living.
So the global demand for oil artificially props up the demand for the dollar.
Precisely. And beyond the petrodollar, there is SWIFT.
Oh, right, SWIFT.
Yeah, SWIFT is essentially the secure messaging system that lets thousands of banks across the world talk to each other and authorize payments. And it is heavily influenced and policed by the West.
So if you step out of line.
Right. If you violate U.S. sanctions, you can be kicked off SWIFT, which effectively exiles you from the global banking system.
Yeah.
But Zhuge's strategy violently bypasses all of this by attacking the physical reality beneath the financial system.
It's like running an exclusive nightclub where the bouncer at the door doesn't just reject your fake ID. He actually throws you into a back alley where you are guaranteed to get mugged.
That is a very grim but very accurate analogy.
Right. You have absolutely no choice but to use the exact currency the bouncer demands if you want to get inside safely. They aren't firing a single bullet at the United States military. They are weaponizing maritime insurance to systematically dismantle the U.S. dollar.
That is the perfect way to frame it. Because you cannot trade oil if your multi-million-dollar tanker is sitting at the bottom of the ocean.
Nope.
Or if Lloyd's of London refuses to insure your ship because it's sailing into a war zone without a Chinese escort.
Yeah.
Physical reality always dictates financial reality. Just imagine the ripple effect. You have Japanese ships that shifted their contracts to yen. They're getting escorted safely through the strait. You have Indian ships trading in rupees, broadcasting their profound thanks to Beijing on international news.
That completely flips the script on how currency works.
It really does.
Usually, a currency's value is backed by a nation's gold reserves or its overall economic output. But here, the utility of the yuan, or the euro, is backed by the literal threat of a sinking ship. Using the petrodollar practically becomes a death sentence for a commercial crew.
And because of that physical danger, the global reliance on the U.S. dollar crumbles practically overnight in this simulation. Countries do not have the luxury of time or, diplomacy.
You don't have to act now.
Right. If they want to keep their power grids running and their citizens fed, they have to abandon the dollar immediately.
The brilliance of Zhuge's plan is that China never has to officially sanction the U.S. They just let the sheer terror of the physical blockade force the entire world to transition to non-dollar currencies. Oil prices eventually stabilize under these new terms. The world economy is technically saved, and China gets 100% of the credit while simultaneously breaking American financial hegemony.
So China has essentially built a velvet rope in the ocean. But the moment you restrict who gets inside that rope based on their bank accounts, you trigger a global panic.
So let's look at what happens when the financial markets wake up to this new reality. The simulation forces you to visualize what the end of the American century might actually look like.
And it doesn't happen through a battlefield defeat.
No, it happens through a currency freeze-out.
Yeah, the reaction in New York is just chaotic. The simulation details traders on Wall Street watching the U.S. dollar index go into absolute freefall.
Pure panic.
The realization washes over the trading floors in real time. If the world's most critical commodity can no longer be safely bought with dollars, the foundation of their entire financial system is basically evaporating.
The artificial demand for U.S. debt just vanishes.
Completely vanishes.
But, the scene that really grounds this thought experiment wasn't Wall Street. It was the pivot to Tokyo.
Yes.
The simulation takes us right into the Japanese Diet, their national legislature, and it focuses on a highly specific, incredibly dramatic moment with this fictional opposition member of parliament named Kenichi Sato.
And Sato is a crucial character here because of his background.
Right.
He's a former geopolitics and security professor, so he isn't caught up in the emotional panic. He understands exactly the mechanics of what he is looking at.
Right. He isn't fooled for a second by the PR broadcasts of the peaceful Chinese fleet.
Not at all.
He stands up in the legislature and delivers this desperate, totally scathing warning to the prime minister. He calls the situation exactly what it is, a rigged game between China and Iran designed to explicitly target dollar-based ships.
But he also points out a glaring, terrifying flaw for his own country.
Oh, yeah, the legacy contract.
Exactly. Yes, technically, the Japanese yen is on Beijing's protected list.
They're allowed.
Right. But in reality, Japan imports over 90% of its energy, and much of that oil is still tied up in massive legacy dollar-based contracts.
Which means Japanese ships are still going to be targeted and sunk.
Unless Japan completely restructures its entire national economy, breaks its existing contracts, and aligns with Beijing's new currency rules literally overnight.
Wow. And Sato is practically screaming that Japan's very lifeline-like, the actual energy required to keep Tokyo eliminated, is now entirely in Beijing's grip.
Yeah.
And he brutally mocks the Japanese government for their passive bureaucratic stance. You know the classic political line, right? We are watching the situation closely while maintaining our steadfast alliance with the United States.
We hear that all the time.
Right. But Sato points out how entirely useless that alliance is when your supposed protector isn't even in the water.
They're gone.
Yeah, and your geopolitical adversary is the only one deciding which of your ships makes it home safely.
It's a deeply sobering moment in the narrative because it strips away all the diplomatic niceties, all the treaties, and it just reveals the raw, unforgiving mechanics of global power.
And the takeaway here for you, listening to this, is just how terrifyingly real these supply chain vulnerabilities are.
They are very real.
It truly does not matter who your allies are on a piece of paper. It doesn't matter what mutual defense treaties your government signed 40 years ago.
Nope.
If someone else controls the actual boats in the water, if someone else controls a physical choke point, they control you. Your entire economy exists at their mercy.
And that realization brings us to the epilogue of this thought experiment. It's a very cinematic, very quiet final scene.
We're back in Beijing.
Yeah. We were back in that midnight room in Zhongnanhai. Zhuge Ziwa places his glowing feather fan against his chest and vows deeply to the supreme leader.
Okay.
And he reflects on his legendary ancestor. He notes that the ancient Kongning crafted the famous Three Kingdoms plan merely to ensure his state survived in a fractured, chaotic world.
It was ultimately a strategy of endurance, like a defensive posture against overwhelming odds.
Yes, but Zhuge Ziwa proudly states that his modern strategy has delivered something far greater than survival.
What does he call it?
He calls his achievement the unification of the Strait and the end of hegemonic currency. He didn't just ensure survival. He fundamentally rewrote the operating system of the globe using a rigged race and a currency starvation tactic.
Wow. And the story ends with this really striking image. They look out the window, and reflected on the glass over the satellite screen is the Chinese fleet heading into the Hormuz Strait. The simulation describes the fleet shining like a silver needle, slowly and methodically stitching together a brand new world order.
It's a very powerful metaphor to close on. And while we must remember that this specific scenario with these specific characters and this perfect execution is a work of geopolitical fiction.
Right, a thought experiment.
Exactly. But the underlying mechanisms it exposes are undeniably real. It highlights the extreme, almost brittle fragility of global supply chains.
Yeah.
It demonstrates how vulnerable even the most dominant currencies actually are if the physical, tangible assets backing them are threatened. And most importantly, it showcases the devastating potential of asymmetrical warfare.
Right, you don't fight a superpower where they are strong, like military might.
No, you fight them where they are entirely dependent, like maritime insurance, shipping lanes, and currency utility.
It brings us right back to that opening image, doesn't it? The ancient feather fan that is secretly a high-tech tablet.
For the circle?
The deepest, most impactful strategies aren't always loud, and they rarely look like traditional warfare. They are layered. They exploit the invisible systems we just completely take for granted.
Absolutely.
This fictional strategy used a physical choke point in the ocean to dismantle a massive economic empire without ever formally declaring war.
It's basically a template for dismantling a system from the inside out.
And that template is what makes this so haunting. It makes you wonder, what other unshakable global systems are just one clever, fixed game away from total collapse?
It's a scary thought.
Could a similar non-military blockade happen right now? Think beyond an ocean strait. What about cyberspace?
Oh, definitely.
Or the semiconductor supply chains in Taiwan that power literally every piece of modern technology? What if a superpower decided to offer cybersecurity protection to the world's cloud infrastructure, but only if you traded in their preferred digital currency?
The exact same playbook.
We rely on these invisible webs every single day. The next time you tap your phone to pay for something or see a massive cargo ship on the horizon, just ask yourself who actually controls the choke point.